Okay guys, in this video, this is part 4 of the war deep dive. I'm going to go into a little bit about leverage points, non-leverage point counters, which matchups to pick, and whatnot, and I'm going to focus on the 3 big ones, and then I'll talk a little bit about some other ones. Okay, so first off is, in war, there's 2 major leverage points. So one is who gets to the armory first, and is able to take that down, because once you take that down, whoever gets first means the other team is punching up the rest of the way. And the second biggest point is if you can get their barracks down, and if you have armory up, then every attack you do during that period of time, you will have, an extra bonus. And so with the way Marvel Strike Force calculates your strongest team power, it doesn't really calculate that correctly. And I find that if you have that bonus, or that situation, then you get an extra 15% bump, roughly. So if you think your guys are like 200k, they're really more like 230k with that bonus. And vice versa happens too. So if they have, their barracks up and you don't have armory, then you're really like, their opponent is like really like plus 15%. So if their opponent is 200k, it's really like you're punching up to 230k. So that's a rule of thumb. It's not exactly how it works, but that's about how it'll feel. So you definitely have to bake that into your estimates when you're fighting. So that being said, in the beginning of the game, until you can kill an armory, until the armory is down, basically you want to be using attacks that are semi-efficiently, but doesn't have to be super efficient. Only until you lose your armory, you have to be really efficient. And only until they lose their barracks. And if you lose your army and they lose barracks, then you can go back to being somewhat inefficient again. So that's kind of like the 2 inflection points. So at the beginning of the war, pretty much you want to just kill things. If you have to beat them by a little bit too much, generally speaking, it's okay. Obviously, if you could punch up a little better, and there's a matchup for you to do that, that's fine. But this is where communicating with your team is really important. So if you see a matchup and you're like, well, it's probably going to be a little overkill to beat that, but it's not going to be the worst thing in the world, you should ask someone in your lines. If nobody has anything, or nobody's going to be getting on that might have something, then you might as well take that fight. If, for example, you know that you could wait, because let's say like it's still really early in the war, the opponent is nowhere near your armory, nowhere near your barracks, then you might just want to wait and see. That's a totally acceptable situation. And what I would do is just post and be like, I can take this team, but I'm waiting to see if someone has a better matchup for it, a more efficient matchup for it. And that's the way you got to think about the game. But at some point, you're like, okay, we need to move on. I'm just going to take that fight and overkill it a little bit, or be a little less efficient. So that's part 1. Part 2 is, when you're thinking about efficiency and killing things, you have to understand how much your team can punch up. So ignoring, let's say everything is equal, like you have armory and barracks up, or you don't have armory and don't have barracks up, so everything's relatively equal. In general, if you take the right counter, you can punch up another 50% of your total STP. So in other words, if you have a Fury team that's 100k, you could punch up to a Defender's team that's 150k pretty easily. That's pretty normal punch up. And as it gets, and it's not really linear, it's more exponential. So like if your Fury team is like 250k, a lot of times you can punch up to like 350k defenders. I guess that's logarithmic, I don't know. But the idea is that you can't keep punching up more and more and more, because at some point the teams are just so much damage that everything dies really quickly. But in general, the more powerful your team is, the higher you can punch up. So that extra 10k or 20k on your Fury team can oftentimes translate, especially if you're a lower level, translate to an even higher punch up. So that means you can punch up almost like 10 to 15k more than if you had just not done it, right? So getting to that last end game tier of where your teams are just at that last bit is really useful to take on these high-level meta teams. And I recommend everybody have 1 or 2 teams on offense that can take to that next tier, right? This is your bread and butter team that you can punch up quite a bit. For me, that's my Fury Shield team. My Fury Shield team is around 250k with the boost. And if I see a Defender's team that's 300k to 350k, I am taking that fight every time. I know I can do it. I can oftentimes do it with the boost on, so I don't even need someone to pop the boost. So just getting to know that team and understanding how good that team is and what your thresholds are is really, really important. That doesn't mean that team might not win. Like, I've definitely lost with my Fury team against high-level defenders, but there are times where, it's just bad RNG and you just redo it again and then you win, right? So, okay, that brings me to defenders. So when you're facing against defenders, everybody should have Fury Shield. Like, I think 99% of people in our alliance or competitive alliances will have them. You should only use Fury to beat defenders or other high-level threats that are leverage point threats. But there's so many defenders, chances are you're going to have enough Fury teams and enough defenders to match them up. So use them for that. That's what you do. If you have a 160k Fury team, just find that 200k defenders. If you have like a 190k Fury team, find that 240k defenders. And you can do that pretty consistently and just save your Fury teams for that. This means that will free up your alliance to using the bigger teams like Power Armor, Technerva, Brotherhood, Brawlers, all these other guys for those teams. If you have your Sinister 6 high enough to use defenders, even better, right? Because that's even a more better matchup fit. So understanding where you have natural counters and using those teams to beat those natural counters is really, really useful. Okay, so now that we talked about defenders, let's talk about Brotherhood. So when you're using your Brotherhood team, you want to be targeting Technervas, you want to be targeting Shield. Anything outside of that, you have to have a good reason to do so. And same thing that goes with Fury beating defenders. Now, that doesn't mean that, my Brotherhood could beat those Avengers, but Jason said, wait for Technerva or Shield, so I'm not going to fight them. If that Avengers, for example, is like 300k and they're just a monster Avengers team, then maybe it's the right move to take your Brotherhood into that. But generally speaking, if you're going to be using Brotherhood, making sure that you're punching up on the right matchup, and it's a good matchup, and it's a high-value target, is really useful. A lot of defenses are done to bait out your opponent to using the teams that they shouldn't be using against them. For example, if I have a defenders team and my opponent uses a Brotherhood on them or uses a Technerva on them, I consider that a win because they should not be using it. They should use Fury Shield. If you have an opponent that has a Shield team and someone uses like Brawlers or something else on them, that's a win in my opinion because they're not using Brotherhood who could be using that. You want to save your Brotherhood for Technova, especially if you're going to be doing the Venom plus Ant-Man combo to beat the Technova teams, which are really, really prevalent late game. Just a super, super important team to do, super useful, highly recommend it. Okay, then the last big one that I see a lot of mistakes on is Power Armor. Okay, so Power Armor should not be used to beat defenders. It just should not be. I understand why some people do it, especially when you have like a 310k monster defenders team. That's probably okay. But in general, your alliance should have enough Fury Shield team to beat those defenders, and you should be able to get them down. In addition to that, you can make Loki and Mystique hybrid teams, especially if you're using the Brotherhood hybrid that doesn't have Mystique in it. And that can help beat defenders so that you can double team it with like two teams to clean them up. But using Power Armor defender teams means you have one less Power Armor for a Technerva team, one less Power Armor for that super monster team that they have, like the monster 320k Avengers or, War Avengers that they might use, or Ultron team that they have. Power Armor is great against Ultron. Power Armor is great against Technerva. It doesn't always win all the time, especially if you're trying to punch up a lot, but it wins often enough that it's the best use of that team. So I highly recommend using Power Armor for non-defenders. It just isn't the best use for that team, and you should have enough tools to beat them. That being said, of course, if you have like a 190k Power Armor team and they have like a 290k defenders, and you've already used your two big Fury Shield teams and you don't have any big Fury Shield teams left, go ahead and Power Armor. That's what they're there for. But other than that, saving them and being judicious for your power team is the best thing to do. So then, if that's the case, then when do you actually want to punch down? Or punch across, I should say. And I would say when you get the matchup you want. Let's say you have a Brotherhood. My Brotherhood's around 240k. If I see a Technerva that's like 240k, 250k, 230k, I might use my Brotherhood on that because I know it's a good matchup. If I had like a 280k Brotherhood and I knew that was the best Brotherhood in the in Alliance, I might save that Brotherhood for that monster team because you're the only one that can take it. But if I just have a medium team, I'm not saving it because it's much better to get that opponent down. Unless you're trying to like come back because they beat your armory down and you have to be super efficient, then you might start thinking about things. But again, that's where the communication with the Alliance comes into play, where you're saying, okay, I could try to take this team. It's a little bit of punch down. I don't know. But if nobody has anything better, let me take it. And that's the best way to communicate. So the takeaways from this video is a couple things. One is, punching across is oftentimes okay as long as you communicate why you're doing it and no one has a better strategy. 2, if you're not communicating, you're doing things wrong. Like, more communication is always better. There's never a scenario where not talking is better than talking in this game, right? You want to communicate with your alliance. You want other people to plan their resources correctly. A lot of what war is deploying your resources in the most effective way possible, so that you don't have to overkill, you don't have to underkill, and you don't have to double kill, right? You can just do everything perfect. Not possible all the time. You can't be efficient, 100% efficient, but that's why the communication works. Is that when you can be, the communicating helps with that. And the third takeaway from this is your Fury Shield teams, your Brotherhood teams, and your Power Hour teams should be used judiciously in the right teams, in the right fashion. And you need to build those teams up to a level where you can feel confident that at least one of them can take a really high-level opponent down. If you're not confident that your Fury, your Brotherhood, or your Power Armor can't take a high-level opponent down, they're too weak. And why that means, most likely you want one of those with boosts, with the Armory boost to be at least 200k, or more than 200k. So if you find that all 3 of those teams are below that, and you have nothing else that's above that on offense, then you're going to have a really, really tough time beating endgame content. And if that's the case, then you might need to rethink maybe juggling some of the priorities around, unless you're about to get Phoenix or about to get Fantastic Four or something like that that's going to help propel you into that range. You're going to want to make sure you have one team. You need to have tools in your toolbox to win. Okay, so that being said, this counter sheet, hopefully it's really useful for you guys. I oftentimes just know from playing the game kind of what counters what. And actually the thing that gives me most difficulty is those hodgepodge teams. Unfortunately with hodgepodge teams it's hard to know, but when I do my in-depth war, like in the middle of war videos, hopefully I'll get you understanding how my reasoning goes of what tools I take into it. My only worry is that because of my setup, I don't have a lot of medium tunes, so I'm not often taking on those hodgepodge teams. I'm usually trying to save mine for like the monster teams because I have one of the highest level Brotherhoods and one of the highest level Furies. So that's kind of where I'm at. Okay, hopefully this helps you guys understand how best to use those 3 teams.